Doctors aren't in charge of what the suffering is or when it occurs. Patients are in charge. So it's not about physical suffering. It is about anticipated, sometimes pain, sometimes a whole bunch of other kinds of symptoms, and the current suffering that that causes. And I think about my friend Penny Schluter, who demonstrated this so well. She was one of our campaigners during the 1997 legislative campaign. The legislature put the repeal on the ballot, made the people vote on it a second time. And Penny Schluter was dying of ovarian cancer at the time, and she went to the legislature and said, please don't do this. I might want this. It's giving me comfort knowing that it's here. Please don't try and repeal it. They did. And fortunately for Penny, she survived the campaign. She lived long enough to see her law work. Now, in the meantime, Penny endured a lot of the things that she said she would never endure. When asked, well, what do you think would be unbearable? She would say, a colostomy. I would never have a colostomy. Well, if I couldn't leave my home, that would be it for me. I wouldn't be interested in living. I couldn't leave my home. Well, long story short, Penny endured all those things. She experienced all those things, and she had the medication, and she had no inclination to take it. Until one day, finally, she really was very, very ill. She called me and said, now I'm going to take it. Barbara, would you come and be with me? I did. And as we were chatting, before she took her medication, I asked her why. So Penny, you have experienced so many of the things that you said you would never want to endure. What is it about now? What is it about today that makes you ready to leave? She said, Barbara, I have finally come to the border between life and existence, and I do not intend to cross that border. People who treat folks with cancer, in particular, know what the trajectory of a cancer diagnosis is. Cancer is so treatable, and we have so many heroic, marvelous, miraculous treatments for cancer that people go along with cancer at quite a high functional level for a good long time, even when they have a terminal diagnosis. And then one day, they suddenly, if this is their function and this is time, they go along and quite suddenly, boom, their function takes a precipitous fall. They fall off a cliff. And that's where Penny was. She felt that she was falling off that cliff. And if she had her medication in her possession, that's when she chooses to take it, not a day too soon. Another preconception people might have is that the overall effect in the state is that probably the period of dying that will be shortened. The period of dying and decline to death will be shortened. Here's why I absolutely agree with Rob. I believe that the overall effect in the state has been to lengthen life, not shorten life. And this happens two ways. Number one, it happens by preventing the violent, premature suicides that people who don't want to fall off that cliff resort to while they still can. And so they jump, or they drive a car into an embankment, or they shoot themselves. They do something while they still have power. And they actually have many more good days ahead of them. If they had the means to a peaceful end, they would live longer. That's the first way that occurs. And the second way that occurs, and we know that it occurs, we've tracked about 65 of these people who come to Compassionate Choices with a plan and the means for a violent death, and they do not do it. Most of them die naturally. The other is that voluntary suffering, and this has been proven with research, when suffering is voluntary, it's more endurable. Researchers have given people their own electric shock administration, and then they've compared it with people who are administered the electric shock by another. And the people who were administering it themselves rated the same level of shock lower, as lower intensity. Oh, that's not so bad. And they worked up to a much higher level than those people who experienced it as external. So if every day I can wake up and say, yeah, it's not so good, you know, I have some pain, I have some breathlessness, but I still make the bargain for life. If they do that voluntarily, we can, it's human nature, we can endure it longer, and we can endure more of it if we do it voluntarily. Another misconception, I think, is that when a doctor writes a prescription, that the therapeutic purpose that the doctor has is to cause the patient's death, give the patient the means to death. And I think that it's clear you can't have that therapeutic purpose when 40% of the people to whom you give a prescription don't use it, and your purpose is not thwarted. I asked Nancy Crumpacker, who's the medical director of Compassion Choices in Oregon, do you think that the doctors who write a prescription and the prescription is filled and the patient dies naturally with the pills under their pillow, do those doctors feel like, that my purpose was thwarted? That patient didn't follow my orders. No, not one. She said, are you kidding? Not one. They feel good. They love it when the patient does not feel as though they have to take the medication. So my latest formulation of this whole dynamic is that the therapeutic purpose of the prescription is to provide comfort, to provide peace of mind. And that therapeutic purpose is served 100% of the time, whether the patient takes it or not. And then the final understanding that we've come to, I think, is that the power of a liberty, the power of freedom, the fact of a liberty is much more potent than its exercise. As a mechanism of this, as a social indicator, the fact of a freedom is much more potent than its exercise. We think about freedom of speech in the United States, and do we gauge the effectiveness of our freedom of speech by how many people burned flags last year? Oh, not very many people burned flags. Who needs freedom of speech? Even if you don't burn a flag, the fact that you are free to burn a flag changes everything. What does it change? It transfers power. And when we understand that, I think we have a clue to the passion of our opposition. Transfers of power, like transfers of wealth, are cataclysmic socially. And what this is a transfer of power from institutions to individuals. And the place where the passion against us is greatest are among physicians and in the church. What does this transfer of power mean for physicians? It means that they are not in charge. Their position, their stature has been diminished to one of an expert, wise advisor, not the director of care. And for the church, it means that they are no longer the source of deep meaning that transcends physical understanding, that source is within, and individuals will look within for the source of the deep meaning that transcends the physical understanding. We will no longer look to a set of dogmatic pronouncements.